Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Shannon Hoffman, the co-director of the Office of Vocation and Mission Engagement for the Sisters of Charity of Saint Elizabeth. It is a joy and honor to gather with you today in celebration of a remarkable milestone that is the 50th anniversary of the canonization of Saint Elizabeth Ann Seton. As we reflect on this half century of inspiration, legacy, and faith, we are reminded of her enduring influence, not just on our church, but on education, service, and communities across the United States. We are privileged to have with us today Sister Ellen Dauwer, Sister of Charity of St. Elizabeth, as our speaker, along with Dr. Kimberly Borin. Sister Ellen brings with her today her talk from Service Recognition Day at Seton Hall University, which Sister Ellen will go into further detail shortly. Sister Ellen will be sharing her personal and historical reflections on how the life and legacy of St. Elizabeth Ann Seton has and continues to resonate with all of us today through the history and values of Seton Hall University, the roots of the Sisters of Charity, and the rich Catholic heritage of New Jersey. This special program is made possible by the ongoing formation committee of the Sisters of Charity of St. Elizabeth, and we are so grateful for their dedication in organizing our talk here today. We look forward to a conversation that invites not only questions, but also curiosity, gratitude, and perhaps renewed inspiration for all of us. So please join me in welcoming Sister Ellen Dauwer and Dr. Kimberly Borin.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Shannon, for that beautiful introduction. Sister Ellen, I'm just wondering, can you tell us a little bit about the setting for this talk that you gave at Seton Hall? Why were you invited to speak there?
So the occasion for the talk was their service awards. It was actually a breakfast. So the service awards breakfast. And the breakfast was held on what their annual celebration called Charter Day. So it's a day that they celebrate the roots of Seton Hall. So the theme of Charter Day was the 50th anniversary of the canonization of Saint Elizabeth Ann Seton. So they decided to have the service recognition the same day. And the service recognition is for faculty, administrators, staff, people who have like 10 years, 20 years, et cetera, of service to Seton Hall. So they wanted to have a sister of charity, a daughter of St. Elizabeth Ann Seton, speak at it.
Lovely. Can you tell us a little bit about the connection between St. Elizabeth Ann Seton, the Sisters of Charity, and Seton Hall?
Sure. So when I spoke to them that day, I used, first of all, the theme of service, because we were gathered there to recognize the service of the people there, the employees of Seton Hall. So first I talked about how service connects us all, the people who were being recognized, as well as really everyone who works at Seton Hall, everybody who ministers there. It also connects Seton Hall and the Sisters of Charity, because we are both groups that are focused on ministry, the ministry of education in particular. And then Elizabeth Seton dedicated her life to service. So I started with that, and then I started to look at really the deeper roots of the story that connects us. So I began by talking about the very foundation, which is when Elizabeth Seton founded the Sisters of Charity, and they were actually called the Sisters of Charity of St. Joseph in Emmitsburg. So Emmitsburg is located in what they call the Valley, and people still call it the Valley today, or St. Joseph's Valley. And she founded the Sisters of Charity there in 1809, and she had come to Maryland the previous year from New York. So she founded the Sisters of Charity, and she died 12 years later. So she accomplished a lot in that short time. But in those 12 years, so she died in 1821. So at the time of her death, there were more than 80 Sisters of Charity that had joined her. at that time. In her lifetime, she also founded 2 schools. One was called St. Joseph Academy for girls that some of them were boarding, etc. And then she also opened St. Joseph's Free School for those who couldn't afford to pay a tuition. So she did both of those. And she also sent sisters to Philadelphia to open the first Catholic orphanage. And that was in 1814. And then in 1817, she sent sisters to New York to start an orphanage there. So clearly, service, and in particular, care of the young and education were really integral to Elizabeth's ministry.
Thank you. So she founded the Sisters of Charity of St. Joseph in Emmitsburg, Maryland. Then I'm just wondering, how does New Jersey fit into the story?
So it's kind of a roundabout sort of story, and there are a couple different branches to it. So really the simplest way to talk about it is to say that the Sisters of Charity of Saint Elizabeth, or we can also say the Sisters of Charity of New Jersey, are really an offshoot or strongly connected in our roots to both the Sisters of Charity of New York and the Sisters of Charity of Cincinnati. So they were both very integral to our early foundation. So there are really 2 foundational stories, and they connect the Sisters of Charity of Saint Elizabeth and Seton Hall. So let me start by sharing at least the beginning or the foundation. So the foundation begins with Bishop Bailey. So Bishop Bailey was the founder of Seton Hall, and he was also the person who was an original founder of the Sisters of Charity of Saint Elizabeth. So in 1853, that was a tiny bit before we were founded. So in 1853, the Diocese of New Jersey was formed from the earliest diocese, which was so it was partly partly New York, and partly Philadelphia. So the southern part of New Jersey had been part of the Philadelphia diocese, and the northern part of New Jersey was part of the New York diocese. So they kind of carved out both those areas and founded a new diocese in 1853. And so the whole state of New Jersey, which is now divided into multiple dioceses, it was all one diocese. And then Bishop James Roosevelt Bailey was named as the first bishop of New Jersey. So he was a nephew of Saint Elizabeth Ann Seton by marriage. And he was also a convert. He had been an Episcopalian earlier. And so he had a lot of devotion to his aunt, and the strong familiar roots as well. So Bishop Bailey was ordained an Episcopal priest in 1841. And when he was ordained, he was assigned, or he got the position of rector at St. Andrew's Church in Harlem. And it was a rather affluent parish. So he had really never met Catholics before that. And so when he was there, he started to meet other clergy in the city. And in particular, he began to meet some Catholic priests to whom he gave money because they often were serving the poor Irish immigrants and Irish families. And so he would get donations in his parish, and he would give it to the priest to distribute. So when he started to form these relationships with these other with these Catholic priests, and started to share his doubts and his doubts about his own faith as an Episcopalian, the validity of his ordination, etc., and the inclination that was growing within him to become a Catholic. So he only served actually at St. Andrews for a year before he resigned. And much to the chagrin of his prominent family, you probably heard that name Roosevelt in his name. So, he was a descendant of one of the Roosevelt families in New York. So much to their chagrin, he resigned in order to discern if he was going to wanted to become a Catholic. So his family decided to send him to Rome, thinking that if he went to Rome and met a lot of Catholics, he would change his mind. Now, why you would send somebody to Rome, but I don't understand that piece of it. But anyhow, they sent him to Rome, and instead of being disabused of the idea, he ended up making a retreat at the Church of the Gesù, which is the main Jesuit church in Rome. And in good Ignatian fashion, he discerned what he was called to do in life, and did decide to become a Catholic. And he was received into the Catholic Church in the following year, in 1842. And he later in his life, he would say that it was really prayers to his aunt, Elizabeth Seton, that were very influential in helping him to make that decision and that discernment. So he then decided to plan to study to become a Catholic priest, because he had been an Episcopalian priest. And so he enrolled in the seminary of Saint-Sulpice in Paris. But then he met Bishop John Hughes, who is the Bishop of New York, a very famous bishop in the history of the New York Archdiocese. And he encouraged him to come to New York to study, and not study in Paris. He encouraged him to come to New York and to study at what was then called St. John's College, which is now Fordham University. And so he went to study there to become a Catholic priest, and he was ordained a Catholic priest in 1844 at Old St. Patrick's Cathedral, not the new one that we know, but this was downtown on Mott Street. So, and then this is fast tracking, but 9 years later, after he was ordained, he was named the first bishop of New Jersey. So that's really the foundation of the two stories that connect Seton Hall and the Sisters of Charity. So it's Bishop Bailey who's the common foundation there.
Thank you so much. And can you tell us a little bit about that first story, which I imagine is about Seton Hall?
It is. So the first story focuses on really the early days of Catholicism in the state of New Jersey. So it was, the Catholic Church in New Jersey was not at all what it's like today, big and thriving, etc. But in those early years, so in 1853, it was really a mere shadow of what it is and what it's matured into in the past century and a half. So in the very beginning, it was made up primarily of German and Irish immigrants who were mostly poor. And there were, in the whole state, there were 30 churches, 25 priests. So in other words, every church didn't have a priest, 25 priests, no diocesan institutions, no money, and about 40,000 Catholics who the history books say they were richer in faith than they were in worldly goods. So this is what Bishop Bailey began with. But like his aunt, he was really convinced of the importance of Catholic education. And so in a short time, really in a very short time, within a couple of years, he started a diocesan college, which is now Seton Hall. It was Seton Hall College, now Seton Hall University. And he also founded a diocesan order of sisters, the Sisters of Charity. So we again see the influence of Elizabeth Seton. So we have Seton Hall and the Sisters of Charity, who have their roots in the Order of His Aunt in Emmitsburg. So no moss grew under Bishop Bailey's feet at all, because he opened Seton Hall. It was called Seton Hall College and Seminary in 1854. And now this is like, again, another connection. It was founded not in South Orange, but it was founded in Madison, which is now Convent Station. So he based the model of Seton Hall on St. Mary's College and Seminary in Emmitsburg, which also has a college and a seminary. So Bishop Bailey purchased what was called the Chegaray Estate, which housed a girls' school, and it taught French. It was really a French school, and the students were mostly descendants of soldiers who had settled in the area after serving with George Washington, or some of the others were emigres from the French Revolution. And so anyhow, so he started the Seton Hall College on what are now our grounds. But then quickly within 6 years, they outgrew the space. To have a college and a seminary in basically one building, and they built another small one. It was just too small, but they also wanted to go closer to the city, closer to the city of Newark. So he purchased other property in South Orange and moved Seton Hall to South Orange. So that's the first part of the story, which is basically how Bishop Bailey founded Seton Hall in Madison, what was then called Madison, New Jersey.
Thank you. So clearly no moss was growing under his feet.
Right.
And so if that first story is about Seton Hall, then I guess the second story must be about the Sisters of Charity of Saint Elizabeth.
It is. So in some ways, believe it or not, to found a diocesan college and seminary was easier than starting a diocesan group of sisters, a congregation of women religious. So in the very early days, before the Diocese of New Jersey was founded, there were some New York Sisters of Charity, because they had been founded many years before that. Elizabeth Seton, as I said, had sent sisters to New York. So there were some New York Sisters of Charity who were serving in St. Patrick's in Newark, and that parish is still, it's the pro-cathedral. And some were also ministering in Paterson. But Bishop Bailey wanted a New Jersey, this was now the Diocese of New Jersey, and so he wanted to have a group of sisters that belonged in New Jersey. And so he wanted it to be independent of any outside superiors, basically. So he asked the New York Sisters of Charity if they would send some sisters to form a separate New Jersey branch. But they had just recently separated from the Emmitsburg community and become an independent New York community, and really didn't have the personnel to do that. And so then he went to the Sisters of St. Joseph in what we call Chestnut Hill in Philadelphia. He also went to the Sisters of Providence in Montreal, who have a Vincentian charism. And then eventually he received a favorable response from the Cincinnati Sisters of Charity, who had also recently become a separate foundation from Emmitsburg. So the superior the founding superior was Mother Margaret Cecilia George, and she was an early companion of Elizabeth Seton. So that's really important. And so she agreed to take 5 young women from New Jersey who would take the train out to Cincinnati and train them to become sisters for a year, and then send them back to New Jersey with 2 Sisters of Charity from Cincinnati to start a permanent group in New Jersey. So that was the plan. And then, of course, there's life. So Bishop Bailey was very excited about this, and so he bought what's called the Old Ward Mansion on the corner of Washington Street and Bleecker Street. So it's right by St. Patrick's there in Newark. And he bought that house for the new community. And unfortunately, though, when the novitiate year for these 5 women in Cincinnati was completed, and they were ready to come back to New Jersey, the bishop, at the very last minute, the Bishop of Cincinnati would not let 2 Cincinnati Sisters of Charity. He wouldn't release 2 of them because he felt like he needed everybody that could be there. And so he wouldn't release them. So now you have 5 sisters that are all prepared to start this new community, but there's no superior. There's nobody who can really lead them. And so they were ready, but there was a house ready, everything, except they needed a leader. So Bishop Bailey went back to New York again, went back to the New York Sisters of Charity, who agreed then to loan 2 sisters for 3 years. And they would be the first leaders of this new group. So one was Mother Mary Xavier, and she was actually working then in Newark, so she was right there. And then Sister Mary Catherine Nevin, who was working at that point in Paterson. And so the story goes that Bishop Hughes, now remember Bishop Hughes from back there with Bishop Bailey, meeting him in Paris and having him come to New York. So Bishop Hughes of New York, the story goes is that he was influential in having the Sisters of Charity of New York say yes to releasing these 2 sisters to come to New Jersey to begin the new community. So they were released for 3 years, and they would have a choice at the end whether to stay or go back. So clearly, from our history, we know that they both stayed. Not only that, but Mother Xavier became the first superior for the Sisters of Charity, and she was superior for 56 years until 1915. So that was a long period of time, and we know how important she is to our community. So the Sisters of Charity then were founded in September 1859 in Newark. So they moved into that old Ward mansion. And you can see in the history books, there's pictures of that old Ward mansion. And there are like multiple heads in every window because they had the sisters there, they had students, it was an orphanage, it was all these things. And they, within a year, they outgrew their space. So they had to go someplace else. So Seton Hall, as we know, had just moved to South Orange, and so the property in Madison, New Jersey, that Chegaray estate, was now vacant. So some of the story goes that Bishop Bailey gave the property to Mother Xavier and the Sisters of Charity, but the records show that they purchased it, and they purchased it for $25,000, which I assume was a loan that they paid back over time. So it consisted of 48 acres. The Chegaray building, which is still standing. It's Seton House now at the bottom of the campus, and then 13 additional acres. So it stretched from what was called the Valley, which is down by Park Avenue, the back gate, the Valley, to the Lackawanna railroad tracks, which is now New Jersey Transit, which is where the sisters eventually built a train station and paid a station master so that students could commute to the newly established Saint Elizabeth Academy and eventually Saint Elizabeth College University. So those are the two intertwined stories of Seton Hall and the Sisters of Charity of Saint Elizabeth that a lot of people don't know. A lot of people don't know the connection between the two. But if you go to Seton House at the bottom of our campus, that original building, now it's since been gutted and redone, et cetera, but it's still there on the same foundation. That Sugar Ray School is now Seton House. And right by the front door, there's a plaque. And the plaque marks this connection, and it talks about Seton, that being the original building of Seton Hall, and now the original mother house of the Sisters of Charity before a new one was built up the hill. So that's the long intertwined story.
Thank you so much for sharing this fascinating history and all the details of these really important foundational stories. What do you think we might take from these stories from our past that we can bring with us as we move into the future?
Well, I would say one thing is the importance of education. So education was clearly very important for Elizabeth Seton. She taught her own children. She made sure her children got a good education. She founded schools. That was the first ministry that she began, as well as orphanages, which care for children as well. But education was very important for Elizabeth Seton, as it was especially in the early days of Catholicism. But it's also, education was also very important to Bishop Bailey. You know, he knew that for the diocese to be able to grow and get firmly rooted, it needed Catholic schools and the importance of Catholic education. I think secondly, we could say that that our roots are from ancestors who rolled up their sleeves when they saw a need and they responded to the need. That's true of St. Vincent de Paul and St. Louise de Marillac, the original founders of the Sisters of Charity. They responded to the needs of the that surrounded them in Paris in the very early days. It's certainly true of Elizabeth Seton, and it's true of Bishop Bailey, and it's also true certainly of people who continue to minister at Seton Hall and of all the Sisters of Charity of St. Elizabeth. I think it's a real characteristic of our congregation that when people see a need, they roll up their sleeves and they do it. You know, we have a lot of technology to help us now with it, but in the early days that wasn't there. And then I think at a really deep place, we're all connected by the name. We're all connected by the name of Elizabeth Seton. So so for Seton Hall, you know, there's Elizabeth Seton right in the name. Now, a lot of people think that the Sisters of Charity of Saint Elizabeth, they think that that's Saint Elizabeth Seton. Now, it really couldn't have been because we were founded before she was canonized. But really, the Saint Elizabeth is the Saint Elizabeth of the Visitation, and so the cousin of Mary. So that's really because we were founded on that date. So that's really the Elizabeth. There's also the campus is dedicated to Elizabeth of Hungary, who is a saint who is a patron of charity. You always see her carrying a basket with bread. But then our early stories also say in hopes for another Saint Elizabeth. So but we do have Elizabeth Seton at the roots of all of us. So we're all connected there. And just as a little postlude, the so Bishop Bailey, when he died, his dedication to his aunt was continued to be obvious in that he's buried in Emmitsburg. So he's buried in what's called the mortuary chapel. It's a little chapel in the original cemetery in Emmitsburg, and there's a marker there to mark his grave. And Elizabeth had been buried right there initially, and now when she was canonized, she was moved into the basilica. But he's right there in the shadow of his aunt, and um, so they're connected in death as well as inspiration throughout their lives.
Thank you so much for sharing all of this. Fascinating. Very fascinating.
It was fascinating to do some of this research, and I really enjoyed it, and it was to be able to tell the story again is great.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, thank you both so much. As we bring this rich and reflective session to a close, I want to extend my deep thanks to both of you for being here today, especially Sister Ellen and Dr. Kimberly Borin for their generous and insightful sharing. Sister Ellen, your reflections on the life and legacy of Saint Elizabeth Ann Seton have reminded us that her story is not just confined to the past. It's alive in our institutions and in our communities and also in our hearts as well. As we go forward, may we continue to be inspired by St. Elizabeth Ann Seton's example to live boldly in faith, humbly in service, and generously in love. And thank you both so much as we continue to celebrate the 50th anniversary of her canonization.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Shannon, thank you. And thanks also, Kimberly. Thanks so much. That was great.
My pleasure. Thank you.